Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for being here at SQL Bits. What we're doing now is we're diving for about 50 minutes into the concepts of Fabric, but from the point of view of a Power BI admin. You've had your existing experiences, you've been working with Power BI, you've been governing it for a couple of years, and now there's this brand spanking new thing called Fabric. What is it? How do I control it? How do I make sure my business users don't do any stupid things? That's the focus that I have. I do want to say that before we go, it has been announced as kind of a big deal. Our Satya Nadella, the CEO, he announced this as perhaps the biggest launch of a data product since SQL Server. SQL Server is kind of a big deal. It's been around for a long while. I have a hard time finding customers who are not using SQL Server. So it is a big thing. If Satya says it that way, it's probably true. But the thing is, it's completely okay to feel overwhelmed with all the stuff that's being fired at you. Not just from a Microsoft perspective, but from all technology vendors all around these days. There's so much coming at you. It's never been moving faster as now. So yeah, it's perfectly okay to feel overwhelmed. Take it one chunk at a time, focus on what's important for you, and then try to keep it going from there. Just take it easy, don't burn yourself out, focus on what's important. But what is Microsoft Fabric? This is not the sales pitch of Microsoft Fabric. I'm just going to keep it really simple, really easy. Essentially, we've announced Fabric as a unified platform. A unified platform bringing together a lot of services and combining them on a single code base, essentially, a single platform. Long story short, we've taken Power BI and we've put a bunch of other services in there. We've taken the concepts of Power BI, we've added pipelines, we've added warehouses, we've added lake houses, we've added real-time analytics. It still uses that concept of tenants, capacities, workspaces. So everything you know from Power BI gives you a really big leg up for Fabric, which is a good thing. Because the other way around, I have data engineers who have been building lake houses with Databricks who now come in, what's a workspace? What's a capacity? Capacity units? So they have a lot of new things to learn. So in my opinion, if you're coming from the Power BI admin angle, you actually have a head start into Fabric, but you have to take a few things that come extra to it. Now, there are a few key aspects we need to understand about Fabric. What's actually changing? Or what's not changing? Well, it is the SaaSification of a data platform. And every time I say SaaSification, there's a little bit of vomit inside of my mouth. I don't like the word, but what it does is it takes away complexity. You don't have to worry about setting up your infrastructure, making sure that everything is well protected, all those things. We take away a lot of the complexity and we make it software as a service. But if you want to go for very cheap, you're probably still better off firing off your own server in the cellar of your office building. It's how far do you want to go for cost versus how little do you want to care about keeping the thing up and running. Making it simpler is essentially what we've been doing. It's the same thing with Power BI 9 years ago where we said, well, reporting services and keeping it up and running is not that easy. What if we made a software as a service product that made it easier for people to get started? And I kind of think it kicked off, kind of. We have a few million people using that thing today. So with a data platform, it's the same thing we're going to try. It means that Power BI has become a part of Fabric. May 2023, May 23rd, 2023, we announced Fabric into public preview. What happened then was, Power BI, you are now Fabric. So it's a Fabric tenant, a Fabric capacity, etc. And Power BI is a workload. That's the thing. The thing you have to keep in mind is that if we're talking about compliance certifications, etc., the certifications for Power BI still apply. It's for the new Fabric stuff that not all of the things are certified just yet. But the existing Power BI workloads, they are all still covered. The key thing is you always have to have a capacity for Fabric items. An item is a lakehouse, a warehouse, a KQL database, a pipeline. It always requires a capacity. Whether it's paid or not, with trials, we'll get into that. But the days of shared capacity with Power BI Pro, that does not apply to Fabric. You need a paid capacity. But then the core concepts apply. You still have your tenants, your capacities, your workspaces. That all is still there. We still have those same ways of making sure that we can protect data from people not being able to access it. We still have the same ways of making sure that the data is put into the right place. So those things don't really change that much, with a few new things that get added onto it. But for me, the key thing here is, even within just Power BI, a lot of people had the opinion, or a lot of people that weren't the admin had the opinion that the Power BI admin was the Power BI expert. They were the person to go to when the gateway was failing, or when there needed to be some optimization of a DAX measure, or there was a modeling issue. They were the subject matter expert for Power BI. With Power BI, it was ridiculously hard to be that person, because Power BI kept expanding at such a rapid pace. Spoiler alert, with Fabric, it's gotten worse. There's so many new things coming in, you cannot keep up. And technically, I'm the guy that's paid to be doing that, and I'm not doing it, because I cannot keep up. So don't try to be the subject matter expert on all of these things. For me, the admin is, how do you stay on top of your tenant settings, your capacity metrics, and then some of the concepts of domains, et cetera, that we're going to get into later. That's, for me, the key skill of an admin. Depending on how complex your environment is, if you have dependencies on sensitivity labels on Microsoft 365, that's different. For most of the tenants I've seen, it's going to be the three of those that I just mentioned. And then, well, like it is with any technology, it's not about the technology part. It's about culture, change management, and how you talk with people. Not to people, but with people. How do you deal with the change management aspect? But luckily, that is out of scope for the session today. Yes. But it's about talking to people. It really is. Now, how do you govern the creation of Fabric items? And you can interpret that any way you'd like. It could be, I am so scared of Fabric, I want no one to use it in my organization, or I want everyone to use it, this thing is great. Or somewhere in between where you're saying, well, let's just give that group some permissions right now, they can get started, and we'll see where we go with that. So there's a few things you need to keep in mind. Whether someone can create an item, lakehouse, warehouse, pipeline, database, blah, 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 those things, it relies on a few things. Do they have a Fabric free license? It used to be a Power BI free license. It now became Fabric free. Most tenants, M365 tenants, have it as you get it automatically. Depending on what the M365 admin did, it's possible it got disabled, it has to go through a process, but for most tenants that I've seen, it's automatic. Can they create an item? There's a tenant setting, can they create something? Or, well, can they get a trial capacity? Can they get a free capacity to try out stuff themselves? Because as I said, the fact that they can create something also needs to mean that they need to have a permission somewhere on a capacity to create that item. Depending if they have trial capacities, they can do it themselves. Because there is this thing that you need to be aware of, is that a capacity admin has the option to override a tenant setting. On a capacity level, I can say, if my tenant admin said, no, I don't want you to use Fabric, a capacity admin can override that setting. They can say, yes, on my capacity, it can be done. So what do you do then? Well, essentially, it starts off with, who are your capacity admins? Have that conversation with them. Talk about the strategy, what you're doing in Fabric today. And then, well, monitor the activity log for create activities. Create warehouse, lakehouse, all those things. Get some logging set up, and then you have a view of governing who's doing what. There are other ways, but for me, this is the simplest one that's out there. There is something now, which is an API called Get capacities tenant settings overrides. It's a whole mouthful. If you put that on a Scrabble board, I'm fairly sure you're going to win. But it means that it's an API that's going to return every single tenant setting that has a different configuration from the tenant level. It is reactive, however, because it only gives you results when you call that API. So I'll jump into an admin portal to show you what I mean. Yep, there we go. So I am within Fabric, just a simple public tenant. I want to go into my admin portal, and I'm going to look at a few things. So what it boils down to is users can create Fabric items. By default, it's disabled. It was disabled. If you didn't take an action back in May, we did flip it on. But most of the tenants, they disabled it, and they said only for these specific people. Look into it. Look into how it's configured. Now, then, the other one is users can try Microsoft Fabric paid features. Can they get themselves a trial capacity? That basically means that if they go into the, so lucky that I answered this just now, if they go here, there's going to be a big green button that says Start Trial. That means they get Pro, Premium per user, and a Fabric trial capacity, if they are allowed to use that. Now, the thing that took a lot of people by surprise is that on a capacity level, I have capacity admin privileges on a capacity, is there's this thing called delegated tenant settings. If I click that, there are a few things here. And there are new things in here since I opened it 2 days ago. That's always fun. It has a tenant setting called users can create Fabric items. It's the exact same one that lives on a tenant setting. But that checkbox on the top, override tenant admin selection, basically says, if my tenant admin said no, I can still say yes. So keep that in mind. As I said, it's culture, it's talking with people, because it is, at the end of the day, what is the strategy within the company? Now, if you don't want people to do this, you can also take away their admin privileges. But that is a difficult conversation. Yes. All right. All right. Now, those are just screenshots of the things that I've shown. Okay. What does it cost? Do you think that's an important question? Yeah? Yep. If you disable the option to start a trial, can they still get a pro subscription trial? No. It is all three or nothing. Yeah. I have feelings about this too. Yeah. I have feelings. Yeah. Sneaky workaround is, and I'm saying sneaky, is by default, a tenant these days can have 5 concurrent capacities. 5 concurrent trial capacities. Set up 5 service accounts, give them a capacity, and that will mean that if they do that, if they say start trial, they will get Pro and PPU, premium per user, but they will not be able to get a capacity because you've already reached the tenant limit. But I'm saying sneaky workaround. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. What does it cost? I think that's an important question. It was free. Free during preview, during private and public preview. It meant that at Ignite in November, I think November 15th last year, we announced general availability. It meant that all of those preview workloads, they were not drawing consumption. That meant that you did see them in the capacity metrics app, but they were flagged as non-billable. That meant you saw it, how much is it consuming, but it's not being taken into account for how your capacity is actually being evaluated at that point. It was free, you saw it, you were not getting charged. The same thing exists today. If a workload is in preview, you will see it, but it will be flagged as non-billable. The one that you have, for instance, today is Data Activator. Data Activator shows up in the metrics app, but it is flagged as non-billable. It used to be Copilot as well, but we started billing for that. The metrics app shows the consumption. It basically, we took the system of Power BI metrics, of Power BI capacities, and we've put a whole new workload on there. But those core concepts, they still applied. Now, what took some people by surprise is when we said Fabric is free, they also thought that the Azure resource was free. Because if you set up an F SKU, an Azure Fabric capacity, you create an Azure resource. You pay for the Azure resource. That's the thing. That's the cost that you have. If you use those Azure capacities, you pay for the uptime of a capacity. It took a few people by surprise. But if you want to test it for free, use that trial capacity that I just mentioned. But what do we bill you for? What does it cost? Well, two things you need to keep in mind. It's compute and it's storage. Storage is the simplest one. It means that for all data that you store in OneLake, it's a new concept of Fabric, you will get billed 0.023 euros per gigabyte per month. Check, that is storage. There are some exceptions in there for BCDR and KQL, but I'm trying to keep it simple here. When does something get stored in OneLake? Well, everything you did in Power BI before Fabric was there doesn't live in OneLake. So you don't get billed for that. For capacities, for premium capacities, PSQs, we had this thing called you get 100 terabyte of storage for free. That still is there. You only get billed for storage when it's in OneLake. Compute, that's where those capacities come back into play. It means that you have a capacity size, you have an allowance, and then every single thing that you use is going to consume a capacity unit. It's basically a magical formula of CPU, memory, IOPS, network traffic, all of those things, and we mash it together into a number. That's it. That's the thing you need to understand about that. What confuses people is that, well, if I have a capacity and I'm allowed to 64 capacity units, you have a P1 F64 capacity, but I'm only using 20, are you going to bill me for those 44 that I'm not using? The answer is yes. We bill you for the uptime of the capacity. So my advice is make sure you get the right capacity and that you use it to the maximum. That's the advice there, basically. But what are some of the options for capacities? Well, it changed a bit last week. Because PSQs, premium office SKUs, are what all customers were using if they were using Power BI Premium. It meant that you had office billing, someone committed for a year, and then you paid either monthly, yearly, depending on the contract, blah, blah, blah. But that meant that you had something which is called free consumption of Power BI. If a person was a viewer on a workspace, or they were a user in an app, they could use it for free. If they wanted to collaborate in a workspace, share stuff, publish things to shared workspaces, they needed a license, pro or premium per user. That was the key thing. When we launched Fabric, we said you have the full range of Fabric options. Until last week. Basically, last week, a blog was published. Go to blog.powerbi.com, where we said, unfortunately, we are deprecating PSQs. That means that PSQs are going to disappear. There's a whole timeline attached to it. They are going away. It's a whole complicated story. I'm not getting into that. But it means that PSQs are going away. You can still use them for at least, I think it's a year that you can still use them, or you can commit to keep on using them for a year. But there's now a difference where we also released a couple of features, mostly around advanced network security, that are F only on those Azure F capacities. So that's where the full range of Fabric options, I changed the slide this morning, I just set an asterisk next to it. It means that you no longer get that full range of options. If you want that full range, go with F64 capacities. Yes, sir, go ahead, please. Can you speak up, please? Will we be able to shift a P to an F license? I'm going to pass on that question for now. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of discussions happening. Yeah, 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 yeah. All right. So the question is, if you go into the Azure portal and you look at FQs and you see the reserved pricing, is that 1 year or 3 year? It's 1 year. It's 1 year. 3 years is coming down the road, but it's 1 year. And I'll get to that point. Okay, thank you so much. Now, F means Azure pay as you go. You pay for the uptime of the capacity. If you leave it up for 2 hours, you only pay for 2 hours up to the second that you've kept it online. But it is more costly because it's an Azure resource. That pay as you go is the same thing. The trial capacity is completely free. It gives you those options as well, and I need to add that asterisk there too, because those advanced network security features also don't apply to a trial capacity. So that's where it's getting a bit more complicated. Now, the right column, the reserved pricing, means that you say, I'm going to commit for 1 year, and you get a 41% discount. That's basically the thing. If you do that, in most cases, you will see prices that are more equivalent to P pricing than you had with the pay-as-you-go prices. Yeah. If you want to get your exact prices, the story is basically talk to your Microsoft representative. That's the thing. They have a better idea of what you have for agreements, billing, discounts, etc. They can tell you perfectly what you have and what you don't have. All right. Now, for me, like I said, that metrics app is going to be key to what you do in Fabric. I'm not going to deep dive into this whole thing. There's a couple of videos online out there as well. I do recommend this is the area where you invest. It means that you need to be aware of the concept of load evaluation and throttling, but especially the new concepts that we introduced called rejections, because that's something that's now new. If you overload a capacity too much, you get rejected. Well, your business users get rejected. Whereas with Power BI, if you overloaded it, PSQs, it was slower. We throttled people. Slow, okay, yeah, you still get your results. Rejections now means that if you go too far, your precious business users are going to get an error message. So they will get an error message saying your capacity has reached the maximum available resources, something along those lines. So they can get error messages, which is a big shift. It means you need to keep an eye on that. If you take it even further, then you get something which is called background rejection. That means we force your refreshes, semantic model, data flows, data marts, warehouse lakehouse, all those things, we also reject those. So essentially your capacity doesn't do anything because you've over-consumed too much. There's a whole thing behind it where we say, well, we give you a lot of bandwidth. We give you bursting. We allow you to execute more, and then you pay us back. So it does mean that you have to keep an eye on that. Yes, sir, go ahead. Yep. Yep. Yeah, okay. If you have a capacity with reserved pricing and you overload it, do you then have an option to add pay-as-you-go? Yes. If you say, I want to get F64, you basically say, I get a budget. I put a budget, that's the thing I'm going to use. You buy a quota of CUs, essentially, of capacity units. You say, this is the amount I want to use, and then you still get to scale up to a higher capacity if you want to. So yes, you do have that options. I'm not going to go too deep into this. Let's talk afterwards if you want to go deeper. There are also some things where if you pause the capacity, the depth gets cleared and you instantly get built. But do you really want to pause your capacity during peak hours in business time? That's also the thing. So overloading strategies, happily talk about that afterwards, but I have to keep moving. All right. Now, for me, as I said, understanding capacities is going to be a key thing. If you come from the Power BI side, you've got a long head start before some of the other people coming in. But then, how do we structure the content? Good news. If you know what a workspace is, you're already better off than the rest of the people. So, how can people create fabric stuff, fabric items? Have they got access to capacities, essentially? But it means that what permissions do they have on a workspace? Essentially, are they allowed to create items in a workspace? Which is not a fabric thing. It's the same thing with Power BI. If they have anything higher than viewer on a workspace, they can create things. So that's something you have to keep in mind too. Well, those new items require a capacity. So if the workspace is still on shared capacity, Power BI Pro, or on premium per user, they will not be able to create those fabric items. They will not be able to do anything with them. If they are running on a premium capacity or fabric capacity, and they have those permissions, they will be able to create it. How do you stay on top of it? Audit, log, have an overview of who's got permissions where, and then start with that. Now, the region of the capacity determines where your data will live. That means that, for instance, here, I have a capacity that's in UK South. That means my data will physically live in UK South, even if my tenant is in North Europe. And no, then I need to point to Dublin, basically. That's the thing. The data physically lives there. That's a key thing to keep in mind. I'll get back on that with OneLake as well, because it's a thing that people do forget about. But as I said, the workspace roles apply heavily. If they have anything higher than viewer, they will be able to create stuff. Yes, go ahead, please. If I want to create just fabric stuff, do I need pro licenses? No. No. Pro licenses have nothing to do with fabric. Yeah, yeah. Just to make it more simple for you, yeah. What about data flows Gen 2, sorry? Is data flows Gen 2 considered a fabric workload? Yes, it is considered a fabric workload, so Pro does not apply to data flows Gen 2. It does to Gen 1. Yes, just to keep it simple. Yeah. The question is, I thought you needed a Pro for anything under F64. Well, yes, for the Power BI part. Data sets, sharing reports, dashboards, etc. That's the thing. If it's under an F64, yes, then you need a Power BI Pro. But if it's a lakehouse, a warehouse, a pipeline, Pro doesn't apply. Take the existing knowledge that you have from Power BI licensing, snapshot, and then add some new things for Fabric on there. But the Power BI licensing structure hasn't really changed, except the fact that we're killing piece queues. Yeah. It hasn't changed. It's just a small change. Yeah. All right. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah. So if I summarize that question, is for Fabric, there's no real per user licensing anymore. That's essentially the answer. Yes. For Fabric, it is a capacity. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Now, this one I really like, domains. I think it's one of the cool new things that are out there, but if you're going to tell me that domains are data mesh, I will be very upset. Let's get that clear. Let's get that clear. Because data mesh is not just about tech, it's culture, people, process, and then a little bit of technology in there. But it's not just, I've made this new thing in a portal, we're now doing data mesh. Please don't get me started. Now, it's a mesh-inspired mechanism. Yes. See how I'm an excellent salesperson? It's a mesh-inspired mechanism to group workspaces. That's essentially what it is today. You create a group, and you put workspaces in there, with a few new things that I'll get to. You can group by whatever makes sense for your organization. I've seen people do it by departments, procurement, marketing, sales, production, manufacturing. That works. I've seen people do it by regions. I've seen people do it by data products. Whatever makes sense, that's how you can structure that. Now, bear with me. One workspace can be assigned to one domain. One domain can have multiple workspaces. Still with me? A workspace can be assigned to one capacity. A capacity can have multiple workspaces. But if you have two workspaces, it can be in different domains and in different capacities. So workspace, domains and capacities, they're not an exclusive or. You can share them, you can do them as what you see fit. Realistically, with customers I've seen, capacities, they are regional because data sits in that region. They've got a capacity in Brazil, the data sits in Brazil. But then they've got the marketing domain. So the marketing team in Brazil, the marketing team in Singapore, they share a logical entity, essentially. Now, what I do think is cool is that within the OneLake Data Hub, it allows you to refine the search, making it more easy for a business user to find their data. I do think that that's one of the really good things. The problem is it's not included everywhere yet. And that's where it can get confusing to some people. But we also have something called tenant setting delegation. It's the same principle, what I mentioned before with capacities. You have a configuration on a tenant level, and then on domain level, you can say, yeah, I want something different, if you allow it. That's the thing here. For those domains, it's a bit different. All right, let me show you what I mean. So I am in my admin portal. I'm going to go to domains. I have a list of existing domains here, and I'm going to create a new domain. I'm going to say, this is SQL bits. And I'm going to add myself as a domain admin. So that now means that I have a logical grouping where I can assign workspaces. Now, I'm going to assign workspaces. I've got a few options. For me, the simplest one is I'm just going to say, I'm going to do it by a workspace name because I know that on my workspaces, they're all prefixed with my initials. But if you want to do it by workspace admin, capacity, that also applies. So now they are all, they will all be, if I do the right thing, they are all assigned to that domain. Now I'm going to go into the OneLake Data Hub. Now, by default, it's set to all domains. It's going to give me everything that I've got access to and everything that I've got workspace permissions to. If I now say, this is SQL bits, it's going to restrict that. The good thing is, I have multiple domains as well, but it did detect that there's no workspaces in there. So it's just leaving them out. But if I now say, this is SQL bits, it's only going to restrict itself to those single workspaces. So for helping business users find the data that they need, this is a big step forward. But what I think is really cool here is that delegation part. If you're on a domain level, and you go into that part here, you have domain settings. And then you have delegated settings. That means that because I've allowed it on a tenant level, I can say, yeah, but I want something else. I want a different configuration. I can say, on my domain, I do not want to have certification. People cannot certify on my domain, or the other way around, as you see fit. Now, the next ones we're going to make available, they're export to Excel. So you can block export to Excel. Yes, but one thing to keep in mind. This is a clear gotcha. Please keep this in mind. Because by default, it has something called contributors. Who can assign a workspace to my domain? That's the default setting. So if you create a domain, everyone that has workspace admin privileges can say, oh yeah, I like that domain. It's probably going to be less restrictive than what I'm in there. So please have the clarity of mind to say only to the admins or only specific groups. Please keep in mind that that default setting is there. Especially if you're going to be working with different layers of sensitivity, what people can do, what people cannot do. This is important. Yes, please. Would I recommend domains for dev, test, and production? No. You could do it, but honestly, no. All right, let's keep going. Now, thank you. Let's talk about OneLake, that shiny new thing called OneLake. The name itself says it, you have one lake for your entire tenant. But in reality, you have many lakes, but we present it as OneLake. What it means is, for a workspace that has Fabric items, you get, under the covers, an Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage account. One or many, most of the times one. What you then do is if you create an item, it's going to create a container. That container contains the files for your Delta files, basically. But the storage account and where that is created is determined by the capacity. If you have a capacity in the region of UK South, that storage account is going to be created in UK South. So especially for data residency, keep in mind where your capacity is placed, where your capacity is located. Now, OneLake has a concept called shortcuts. It's based off the Linux symbolic link principles, and it means that you can create a pointer to external data sitting somewhere. In reality, it is a file store. Most of the times, it is files that Fabric can work with. Delta, Parquet, CSV, or if you want to include image files, those as well. But if you want to do something with the data, the best thing to do is get it in the Delta framework format. But it can sit in Azure Data Lake Storage or Amazon S3, AWS S3. There's a few things coming down the road, but I'm not talking about those today. But it means that that data can physically stay there and we'll only get the data when we need it, which is a good thing because you can keep your existing investments. But it gets more complicated if you have multiple regions. Like the example here, you've got a capacity in North Europe, you've got a capacity in East US. What's going to happen if you're starting to work with data from both angles? Well, if a user from East US wants to do something with that data, they're going to use it for their own process and land that data, well, that means your data has gone from EU to US. So the human aspect still applies. People need to be knowing what they're doing, especially when it comes to data residency. That's important. If you don't have capacities across multiple regions, it's not that big of a concern here. But there are a few shiny new tools for the admin. One of them is called the Admin Monitoring Workspace. Essentially what that is it's a workspace we built for admins that did not want to go through the effort of setting up basically processes to call APIs, store the data, build reporting on top of that. It's a one-stop workshop with some pre-built reports. Is it the most sexy report ever? Will it answer all of your questions? No. But it is, like I said, it is the easy option where you can just go to and say, I want to use it, I want to get some quick insights on that data. Over time, you'll see a lot of new things happening in there. It is a read-only workspace, so you cannot make changes to it. Now, the thing that you have to keep in mind is that you need to be an admin, and you need to have Power BI Pro to access that. And that's what really surprised a few people. It's going to get configured by the first person that opens that workspace and opens that semantic model. It's going to set up a scheduled refresh using that person's credentials. So that's something that took a few people by surprise in the concept of PIM, Privileged Identity Management, where they had a temporary account that then got disabled. So it took a few people by surprise. But it means we have a few reports in there. The first one is activity log data. 30 days of data, who has done what. Simple, easy workspace. If you want to get more into detail, either set up your own APIs or look into third-party tools that are out there. There's also something in there called Purview Hub that gives you data about certification, endorsement, sensitivity labels, those kind of things. We'll keep adding more things in that workspace, but for now, that is essentially it. Now, the one thing, I'm going to skip the slide and just show you, that I also do think gets overlooked way too often is something that's called Monitoring Hub. Monitoring Hub is available from the navigation pane here. If you open that, it means I get an overview of every single item that I have read permissions to, every single item that I can read. I get an overview of that. What it shows me is, what's the status? When did it last refresh? Did that refresh fail? Did it succeed? Is it still in progress? So across your workspaces, what's actually happening? For instance, if I want to focus, if I want to say, okay, what are the workspaces that need some attention? I can say, I want to filter, I want to focus on the failed workspaces or on the failed pipelines. Now I know, okay, these are the pipelines that failed. I might need to look at them from a single point of view. Now, does it export to Excel? No. Can you call an API to automate it to fire off alerts? No. It's purely for getting that insight, observability, getting that quick insight. Now, keep in mind, it's only going to display you the items that you have permissions to, the user that opens it, and the permissions that they have. It's not the holistic tenant-wide overview. We might do that, but today it is just those items you have permissions to. Right. So one of the cool things is an API to call tenant settings. A lot of the customers that I've worked with, they wanted to get an overview of what do I have configured? How are my tenant settings configured for, well, basically auditing and compliance reasons? You had to do some funky workarounds to get that data. Now it's an API call, and it's going to give you the results. You can document that, you can build up a framework if you want that, and essentially, if you have a change, you can act on it. That's the good thing about it. It's an API that made it a lot simpler. Now, I am very sorry, but I'm going to skip the Copilot part, because it would take me too far, and I only have 7 minutes and 50 seconds left. Now, because, yeah, thank you so much. What I want to talk about is something called Sharable Cloud Connections. They got lost in a flurry of announcements, and I think not enough people are aware about this. It's something we announced back on September 1st, 2023. So yes, it's been there for 6 months already. But I do think it genuinely is an improvement on what we had before. It means that for cloud connections, so let's say Snowflake or Databricks or Redshift, it allows you to set up multiple instances of that same data source. Anyone out here using Snowflake or Google BigQuery as a data source? Yes. The question that I got from those people a lot of the times is, well, we want to set up multiple connections. We want to have a different warehouse or a different role used for that connection. Now, this actually enables you to do that. It means you set up an instance of that data source, and you can have a separate configuration setting there. That's the cool thing. That's the thing that wasn't possible before, because if you published the same data set with a different configuration, it would overwrite the first configuration that you had for cloud configurations. So not really an ideal situation. This improves that a lot. But it also allows you, as the name mentions itself, it allows you to share those connections. So from an admin perspective, that would allow you to set up a configured data source the way that you see fit, and then you give people permissions to use that data source. You still manage that data source, and you get to share those permissions with people. If you need to share or rotate credentials, it's a lot easier now. Now, I'll show you what I mean with that. If you want to find those shareable cloud connections, you need to go to Manage Connections and Gateways. If you're in Manage Connections and Gateways, that now means you have a list of all the connections that you have, both on-premises, VNets, and then those cloud connections. Now, the one that I want to show you is, for instance, here. I have a test set up for Google BigQuery, because that's the thing that I was testing this with, and I have a configuration setup. It's essentially going to connect to a Google BigQuery store, and I've given it a credential. I've said you're using this service account to connect to that project. Then I've set up another instance, and it's using a different account connecting to a different project. Before, that would not be possible. It would basically override itself. Now, if you want to create a new permission, You can do that. You can start off. If you are in the data source permission view, you can start creating those new permissions. But the cool thing here is as well is you can say, I want to manage my permissions. And now I'm going to say, my colleague Lars, I want to make him, yep, thank you. I want to make him an owner of this cloud, of this shareable connection. He now has privileges to make changes to that configuration. Or I can say, well, no, you can only reshare, or you can only use it. You get to publish against that data source, against that configuration. If he doesn't have permissions, he is not able to use it. So that means that if I go into a workspace where I know I've got a BigQuery set up, I can go in there, and I'm going to go in there, and I can see this. I now have those two configurations where I can say, that's the project, that's the user. A lot easier to control this. If you have multiple data sources for semantic models set up to use that one, you change it one time, it affects all of the other data sources downstream. So from a central point of view, this is really interesting. Now, APIs, to automate this, they're coming. Yes, go ahead, please. Is this just for Power BI semantic models, or is this just for pipelines? I'm not sure if it's live already. I know we're planning it. I know we announced it. It's in the blog, but I'm not sure if it's live already. It's the plan to do that, yes. Same thing for data flows. Yeah, Gen 2. Yeah. All right, good. Now, that is the majority of the things that I wanted to cover. What I do want to mention is if you want to try to keep track of the roadmap, go to aka.ms/fabric roadmap. You get an overview of the things we've got planned, and you get to see the public-facing timelines. Expect a big update somewhere in the coming month, because then we're going to commit to the things we're going to be releasing in the coming semester there. That said, you can find the slides over on my GitHub. It's basically the GitHub page. I don't have a QR code to evaluate the session. I'm not even sure if it can be evaluated. Can it be? Okay. Okay, yeah, if you want to evaluate the session, please do so. And we have 2 minutes for questions. Is there non-profit pricing for Fabric? Yes, but I'm not sure how to get to it. But I know there is Azure non-profit pricing, but I'm not sure where exactly that information is located. But I know it is out there, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. So it was an observation. If you have an admin account or your account that's been added to all of the workspaces and someone says, my data set's not working, it makes it a lot easier to find the one that you're actually looking for, because you filter it down to those failed items and you instantly get where you need to be. All right. Any other questions? When we kill PSQ, when we deprecate PSQs, are pros licenses still a thing? Yes. Yes, so the Pro and PPU licensing scheme, E5 and when you have it included, that's not changing. Okay. Yeah, so the question is, if I want to create lakehouses, warehouses, etc., that's all based in the capacity-based licensing scheme, but then for Power BI datasets, semantic models, does that still apply to the existing Power BI licensing structure? Yes, that's still if you want to be able to create a dataset or a semantic model, you would need that Pro subscription. All right. I'm gonna wrap up. We're at time. Thank you so much for attending. I'm gonna grab my stuff so the next presenter can come up, and then I'll answer some questions in the side here, or find me anywhere else tomorrow and Saturday. Thank you so much.